Hello there, thank you for clicking on to this video, and today I will be talking about how I see the state of Linux to the desktop user. This is going to be a very rambly vlog, so if you're looking for some succinct, professional, intelligent insight, you're probably better off looking elsewhere. But I've been using Linux for quite some time now. I've switched around more than a few distributions, and I've seen it evolve quite a lot. So I am going to just be sharing with you some of the most welcome improvements over the past few years, and how I feel Linux stands up against other distributions and other operating systems today. 2015 was the year that I got rid of my Windows partition, so I think that says a lot in and of itself. It was only the games holding me back, and there has, Linux has received quite a lot of criticism over the years that it just doesn't have as many games as Windows, and it doesn't. And it won't in the near future. But at the time I last saw, it had 1,700 games. That's really quite a lot, and there are some genres where there are big sort of holes in terms of games that Linux is particularly light on, like a lot of open world games, and a lot of AAA titles don't often make it to Linux. But I got to admit, over the past couple of years, I've really been excited by indie gaming so much more than AAA gaming that I felt a lot of comfort from moving from Windows to Linux, where otherwise I would have felt particularly nervous. Because I'd be going without a lot of games. But I have about 200 games in my Steam library, and about 160 of them run on Linux natively, and I can get the vast majority of the others to run through Wine and play on Linux. Those are fantastic pieces of software. And I've got to admit, I have been considering investing in Crossover, not necessarily because I need it, because everything that I really wanted to works either through Linux directly, or in the case of some games, I do play them through Wine, but everything works fine. Crossover is often if you need an extra, new piece of software in order to run your Windows game on Linux. I just would like to support the company. I think I'm kind of getting to that stage because they do a lot of code contribution. But just about any game that's made before, so I think that's like DirectX 10 and before in regards to Microsoft DirectX, pretty much works on my machine and through Linux, and in a couple of years I would imagine that there will be support for DirectX 11. I think that's the way it goes, unless we're like as far back as DirectX 9. But regardless, I'm happy with the games. Like my favorite Elder Scrolls games, Fallout games run. Obviously not the latest Fallout 4. I think I've seen some people run it through Crossover, but I'm not 100%. I haven't tried it myself. But Fallout New Vegas and all that kind of stuff, works for me. So games that I sort of grew up with have no problem running. And there's plenty of new titles, in fact, some really exciting new titles, because the intellectual property that AAA titles have usually, sort of owned, is not necessarily available on Linux. I've been looking elsewhere for games, and I've got to say, I've found some really interesting treats that I would not really have expected to see had I not have been sort of put more firmly into the indie space. But like I say, I've been very excited by the state of indie gaming as a result of the last couple of years of development, and I like to see, I like seeing as many indie games on the Linux platform as possible. And I think that there's a reason why I'm a little bit more endeared to the indie games than the smaller games, is because there is certainly a profit motive, and I would imagine that profit motive is proportionally better from an indie standpoint. Although there have been indie developers saying that it's probably not worth the profit at this state of in the current state of play, the work and turnover, and whereas like AAA titles would almost certainly make a lot of money out of it. I like the fact that it's very clear that indie developers are developing for Linux because they want their games to reach as many people as possible rather than the profit motive. They want, and they care about gaming, and they care about their product, and they're proud of their product. A lot of these indie developers, they've got a lot of personal investment in it. So it's great to see that expressed on Linux, and I'm glad to see Linux as a platform for it, and I'm glad to see it taken more seriously by the likes of Unreal Engine and Unity as well. We're not on parity yet, but I mean we will be, and we're very we're going in the right direction, and that at this time is good enough for me. We're going in the right direction. So I certainly haven't missed games. I have not missed games really one bit, because you know, I know in a couple of years they'll be ready to work on Wine, and there's plenty on Steam. So there we go. The other criticism that Linux often receives, and the one which I feel it has also made a fair amount of strides in, is multimedia, specifically video editing. I'm not super familiar with audio editing, the audio editing side of things, because the only audio editing I do is just the audio for these videos. But I personally feel that the suite of tools available to manipulate all the audio in post is it's all there, and it's all, you know, it's fantastic. And even the free file formats are even usable and everything like that. It's all hunky dory, and it works all fine out of the box for me. For musicians and the like, I'm not entirely sure, and obviously you'll have to ask them. In regards to video editing, this is where Linux has come along in you know, leaps and bounds, and it's going to get a lot better. Now, I use Kdenlive, which is it's a Qt application. It's quite heavily integrated with the KDE Plasma type structure of things, which is always a little bit irritating, considering that that I use GTK desktop, but you know, you sort of get over it. It's a good piece of software. It's gone through some buggy phases, has Kdenlive, and that's no surprising considering what an advanced piece of software video editing software is. But the last couple of, you know, getting back into the swing of doing daily videos again, Kdenlive has not crashed once on me yet over the past couple of weeks, which is really quite good, actually. So a certain marked improvement over a couple of years ago. And I really would like to see Kdenlive. I'd love to see a GTK version. I would really love to see a GTK version. But outside of that, I would like to see it just grow and get more stable, and a few more features. See if, you know, multi-threading or GPU accelerated encoding and stuff like that can be put on next. But yes, I mean, I got to say, in the two areas Linux was most criticized for, it has made up amazingly, and everything else, it's almost leading the way in a lot of places. And I suppose one of the biggest assets that we've had, that Linux and that open source has had, and a lot of you are going to probably get quite angry when I say this, but it probably is Google. If we're completely honest, Google have definitely been pushing the way for a lot more open standards as of late. So I'm not necessarily just talking about open sourcing the Android operating system, because it was Google's choice to open source it. Android, under the original company, were going to keep it as a proprietary operating system, possibly. So I say possibly because I have no idea what Android's plans were if they weren't getting bought out by Google. Like, it's impossible to say. But it doesn't, like, Google have particular vested interest in the open source world. So they did open source the Android operating system. They have developed and created and open sourced a lot of fonts. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to Linux is that Linux was lacking a lot of free fonts that looked really nice, that could be used in professional publications, and Google did actually contribute. My personal favorite is Open Sans. I love doing documents in Open Sans, and I know that fonts aren't exactly like the sexiest thing in the world to talk about, but they are something that are factored in. It's little small things that that need to be kept on top of if Linux is going to make it. We can make the big hurdles, we know that, but we've also got to remember to tighten tighten every screw and sand off every corner. So we've got to so Google have done that as well. They've also brought about the popularity of an open video format, WebM, using Vorbis for the audio, no less, as well. This is fantastic. It might be a codec that's a little slower to encode than MP4, but it's a widely supported open source video format where there were some contenders, but there was nothing on a par with WebM, and it's found its niche in terms of like little looped videos. You see a lot of them in WebM format. You see the YouTube adopt it for the 360p and the 720p versions of their videos in their video player, I think. So we owe Google a lot for that as well. What else? They've open sourced quite a lot. They're closing down, of course, their coding platform, but they say that's as a result of, I don't know. I'll let them explain that one. But I know that Google, of course, also are some of the worst offenders when it comes to dealing with personal information and that kind of stuff as well. So they have given a lot back, but I mean, it comes at a really heavy price. And it could very well be in the case that where Google might become the next Microsoft in its overbearingness, in its surveillance and all that kind of stuff, we could very well save ourselves from Google using the tools that Google has provided. And I think that's really quite interesting, and one of the great ironies of open source software. It's another one of the other great ironies of open source software is, of course, that North Korea use Linux distribution Red Star OS, and that the NSA use, I think, is it CentOS or Red Hat servers to to do all their spying and all that kind of stuff as well. So yeah. That's the thing about open source, and that's the thing about sort of freedom of speech and the sort of the software applications of that, is that you make something available for everyone, it's going to be used by the people that you like and the people that you don't like as well. So there's all of that. So this is also the 2015 is also a year where I changed my primary driver, my primary Linux distribution. I used to be a big advocate for Mint. I still am a huge advocate for Mint. If you are new to Linux, if you don't know what distribution you want to get, Linux Mint is generally my recommendation. It has all the power of Ubuntu's technology. It has all the compatibility with Ubuntu's technology, and it has a lot of the the great works, and a lot of the manuals and documentation also that apply to Ubuntu also apply to Mint. But Mint adds this community element to it. It's almost like all the corporate stuff was stripped out of Ubuntu and replaced with community elements, and that's what Linux Mint is. It uses a more traditional desktop interface, something more similar to Windows XP rather than Ubuntu, which uses something which seems reasonably familiar to a Mac, but I'm certainly no Mac expert. So I certainly feel that Linux Mint is the distribution I would recommend for newcomers as well as the fact that it's stable, but also because it's on a long-term support, it means that if you fix an error, you don't really have to come back to it until you're sort of reformatting the distribution, or not reformatting your disk drive to install the next version of Linux Mint, because when you upgrade Linux Mint every 2 years, they recommend that you do a fresh install. So yeah, state of play in Linux. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's never been better. So I switched over from Linux Mint to Manjaro. So I decided to actually finally give a rolling distribution a go. This was as a result of the review that I did. I looked at the review. I think originally, a long time ago, I reviewed XFCE. Then I did the KDE one for a long-term review, and I really liked that. And then I came back to Mint after sort of, and then I started using... No, then I started using Antergos, then I started cycling through my various daily drivers until... So I never went back to Mint after that. So then I cycled through all my daily drivers, because I liked Antergos as well. Antergos is a great... if Manjaro doesn't suit you, Manjaro doesn't work. Antergos is great. But the thing I liked about Manjaro is that it comes with the non-free driver support out of the box, which is going to make it very accessible to people who have NVIDIA cards who don't really know why it's more difficult to get their drivers to work. I like the fact that Manjaro were just like, nope, included, boom, there you go. So I was very impressed with some of the little touches that Manjaro did. So I decided to go with Manjaro as my main primary driver, feeling quite perilous because it's a rolling distribution, and I really did like it, but it was very buggy. It's very buggy. It's a very buggy distribution. Every month they'll do a big update of a lot of the packages that they've held back from Arch, and you will often find that bugs can arise out of that. Now, because it's a rolling distribution with a lot of regular updates, you will often find that the fix will just be an upgrade down the road. So if it's a minor annoyance, then all you have to do is put up with it for a couple of weeks, and then it'll just be fixed back to normal, which is a great blessing, and you see a lot of very annoying bugs fixed out that way, and that works really, really well. But that being said, initial problems arise more often as well, and sometimes they can be quite nasty as well. It updates the kernel very often, a lot more often than Linux Mint. So So I've had a couple of kernel problems. I've had to switch which kernel I boot from, which is again, these are small minor issues, but they're ones that that I wouldn't think that a newbie would be prepared to deal with. And there are a lot of them as well. That's the other issue, is that you will learn how to fix and diagnose errors very, very quickly when you're on a rolling release. And that, I suppose, if you want to learn how to fix computers, a rolling release is kind of good like that. In regards to its stability, it still is, it's run. I've never had a problem actually getting one to boot up and go, minus the kernel error. And even then, the kernel's actually booted up. It was just when they were actually booted up, there was some little bugs and stuff. So you just switch which kernel you boot from, bang, job's a good one. In terms of its stability, it was fine, like in its core stability, in the ability to boot up, that was fine. It was just the programs that were on top of it, the stuff in the repositories. There was some compatibility issues with some of the packages from the AUR. That's the AUR. That's the community stuff is out there as well. But I really did like it. If you're willing to sort of put in you're going to put in a couple of hours a month fixing some of the problems that you're going to come up against. You'll get better and it'll get faster. But it is a distribution I recommend if you really want to get your teeth into Linux and you kind of want to take a step away from Ubuntu. I'm still on it at the moment. I am thinking about possibly either sticking with it or possibly trying one of the Ubuntus on a 6-month cycle just to see what that's like. I could very well actually end up trying Ubuntu as a primary driver once the new long-term support is released in April. I might very well then possibly transition across to Linux Mint if I don't move away from Manjaro, just simply to see what those guys have to offer. So anyway, that's about it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. All in all, State of Linux, pretty damn fantastic. They've certainly accelerated in areas like gaming, like in multimedia creation. I have not had a problem in any of the compatibility side of things. Like I can just deploy Linux on a piece of software, on a piece of hardware rather, and it's always, at this point it worked. Scanners, plug in and go. Printers, plug in and go. And for the most part, I've only ever come across bugs and instability when I've kind of been seeking it, when I've been playing a dangerous game. But if I wanted to deploy a secure system that won't break, I know how to do it and I can do it. And I feel that, like, with a little bit of instruction or a decent documentation, I feel anyone can. Also, I couldn't help but notice over recent years that the number of desktop environments has increased. Whereas it used to be pretty much GNOME, KDE, and XFCE, now we've got just about, well, I don't know, like a dozen. We've got, everything from the Deepin, Pantheon, Cinnamon, Mate, and many of them seem really actually quite good as well. So there certainly seems a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm actually trying out Mate at the moment on Manjaro, and it's really good. I really like it. It's exactly what I want. It doesn't do too much. It stays out of your way. It's nice. It's responsive. It looks good. It's got plenty of sort of small user features and stuff like that. And it's very customizable. So I got to say, that's certainly a win. I do kind of feel that in a lot of the cases, we could very well end up with too many desktop environments, and some of them might end up being sort of under-maintained and start dying off. Possibly XFCE, I don't know. That seems to be the one that's sort of hanging on by a thread, but it might recover. It might recover. Anyway, that's about it for me today. Thank you very much for watching, and please let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.